Shabbat Shalom. So I'm taking the idea of a Devar Torah kind of literally today. I'm speaking of a few Divrei Torah, a few words. The mic? Do I need to stand at the... I hesitate to... There. Okay. More better? How's this? This better? Up? So we clearly need to reread that part of Exodus. So I'm taking the idea of a Devar Torah a little bit literally, and I'm looking at a few words of Torah from this week's Torah portion. In our way of reading the Torah, this is Parashat Shoftim, which I think has the opening verses are some of the most inspirational that we have in the Torah. It's the idea of setting up a system of justice and pursuing justice and establishing sort of a working, functioning civil society. But the material I work on has a triennial Torah cycle, which is not, yes, I know there are fans of the triennial cycle in the room, in which the Torah was read over the course of 3 or 3.5 years. It's different from the modern triennial cycle. And in the triennial cycle that I look at, there was a Torah portion, a parasha that began with Deuteronomy 20:10, so very late, actually the beginning of the 7th Aliyah, I believe, maybe the 6th. And this is the verse that reads, Ki tikrav el ir lehilachem aleha v'karata aleha l'shalom. When you approach a city to make war upon it, you shall call out unto it for peace. So this is known in my material as Seder Milchama, the Torah portion of war. And if you look in Eitz Chaim, the verses that follow it, it says modern readers recoil from this because of the litany of laws that follow it about putting cities under the ban and demolishing one's foes. So I was really struck when I was looking at some of the ancient interpreters on this ancient breaking up of the Torah portion about the fact that one of the poets I love to study chose this portion for a poem that uses the word shalom as its refrain. In part this is because I know there's a poet who, in his poetry for other Torah portions, actually has a very similarly structured poem where every line ends with milchama, with war. So he's perfectly capable of being fairly jingoistic. But when he read this portion, I think the tension, the juxtaposition of drawing near to a city to make battle against it, but first proclaiming to it peace, that something in that tension inspired him. And the text that this is from the Cairo Geniza. And those of you who are interested, I have a translation of just the final portion of it with the Hebrew available. You may have picked it up when you came in, or it's also, it's on a little table outside. But this is the portion that's on the Daf Tefillah, on the prayer handout, is actually just the very final piece. And I was intrigued by the fact that the poet, in looking at just this verse, Ki tikrav el ir lehilachem aleha v'karata aleha l'shalom, seems to play with the definition of city in a way that I think we might find resonant. Because he doesn't take the verse at its literal level, imagining armies drawing near cities to wage war. Rather, he understands it in one part of the poem as describing the need for, when you draw near your community with aggression in your heart, that you should first pause and find a peaceful way forward. So he praises one who makes shalom bein adam l'chavero, one who makes peace between members of the community who are fighting. And then he actually turns and he says, even within our houses, we can sometimes draw near to each other in a way that is not suggesting of cordiality and intimacy, but rather we can draw near each other within our own homes with aggressiveness in mind. And so he praises in another part of this poem one who makes peace bein ish v'ishto, so between husband and spouse, between spouses. So there's this idea that there's a national war and peace being described in this Torah portion, but there's also communal war and peace and even domestic war and peace. And Yanai was not so psychologically sophisticated that he went as far as the Zohar, which would talk about the fact that even within ourselves we can wage battles of war and peace, but I think he would have appreciated that insight. So anytime we sort of approach another, we can be approaching, meaning, sort of like worked up by events with heat and passion in our hearts, inspired by Seder Milchama, and Yanai says this verse tells us we have to pause and try to find a way to peace. It may not work. The rest of the Torah portion makes it very clear that may not work, but that we should at least make the effort. So when this poem is reaching its conclusion, however, the poet segues from these themes of the Torah portion to the themes that are the part of the service that embellishes. And here I should mention that this poem that you have before you was written to take the place of the Amidah as we know it. So the part that you have right before you is leading into the Kedusha. So it's written to lead you into Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. At the moment in that prayer when Israel joins the heavenly hosts in praising God, and we at prayer strive, as it were, to ascend just a little bit from our world into the heavens. With this in mind, our poet, whose name was Yanai, and I should mention that he's the first in Hebrew to write a signature acrostic, so he signed his name into his poems, which is how we know his name, and I've been perversely gratified in recent weeks in media to notice that acrostics are making a comeback as an artistic form. So Yanai, one of the early trendsetters for that. So Yanai redirects our attention from the familiar terrestrial world and all its conflicts and presents us with something a little more abstract, or maybe I should say a little more transcendent, as he offers us a vision of God and, at parts of this poem, God's city, Jerusalem, Ir Shalom, the city of peace, framed in terms of an intrinsic yearning for peace. It is an ideal God and Jerusalem that transcend violence, even as violence cannot help but touch them, because heaven and earth do meet. And earth brings with it this drawing near for violence. But I think you could say here that Yanai says heaven draws near with peace. This is the text on the handout, the poem in which the author turns his and our attention from the past to the present and hopefully the future, from the mundane world to the heavens, and from the world as we know it with all its conflict to the world the poet knows wishes to be. Yanai lived in a time of great prosperity. He lived in the 6th century, but also great precariousness, a time of great accomplishment, including majestic synagogue artifices, and great unease, a time of great hope and expectations. It was a period of great messianic fervor and great anxiety. From where we sit, his epoch was at least as turbulent as our own, and I think it's important to remember that he's not sitting cozy under some vine or fig tree penning these words. He's living in the thick of very turbulent times. And yet, when given a moment to pause on Shabbat, to contemplate the perhaps buried, reluctant, but nonetheless true existential nature of creation and creator, our poet chose these images of peace to fill his mind and ours. He offers us an acrostic from Aleph to Tav of peace. And now I'll just read for you the words that he has. So you'll see this was probably actually congregationally participant in its period, but his pronunciation of Hebrew is a little bit different. So, Uvachein ula'ad na'aritzacha, and thus we praise you forever. Shalom ata, shalom bach, shalom gedolach, shalom darkach, shalom hiluchach, shalom va'adach, shalom zichrach, shalom chelach, shalom tichsach, shalom yakarach, shalom kulach, shalom limudach, shalom machanach, shalom naomach, shalom shodach, shalom imach, shalom pa'olach, shalom tzva'ach, shalom kodshach, shalom ratzonach, shalom shemach, shalom tokpach, shalom chol asher lach, uv'shalom tu'aratz, v'ukdusha tukdash. And thus we praise you forever. Peace is you. Peace is what you are. Peace is in you. Peace is your greatness. Peace is your path. Peace is your way, and peace is your meeting place. Peace is your memorial, and peace is your might. Peace is your fortress, and peace is your treasure. Peace is your entirety, and peace is your teaching. Peace is your encampment. Peace is your utterance. Peace is your principle. Peace is with you. Peace is your handiwork. Peace is your host, and peace is your holiness. Peace is your wish, peace is your name, peace is your strength. Peace is all that you possess, and through peace shall you be praised, and holiness shall be hallowed. And as we are created in the divine image, may we also strive to be of peace. Shabbat Shalom.